operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. I'm Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to take a look at the Gators' 2024 football schedule, and I'm going to tell you a little about each game, and at the end, we may have a prediction for what the season will hold. Before we begin, I want to thank all of you who have checked out our previous two episodes. They're by far the most viewed and listened to episodes of any that I have done on this podcast. So thank you to everyone who liked, shared, subscribed, and really just made it special. I am shocked at how many people I see on the YouTube numbers when I go and check. So that's incredible. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone that has checked out the Why We Huddle side series, where I bring in Gators and they talk about their fandom. If you've not checked that out, check that out as well. With that said, definitely, if you enjoy this content, give it a like. If you have not subscribed already, please do. I intend to have even more content during the season, not just through podcasts, but also different things going on with stadium atmosphere outside the stadium and all sorts of things. Also, I did a similar podcast to this by doing a guest spot on the Respect Our Decision podcast last week with Hirsch and the gang. It was a good time. Definitely check out Respect Our Decision anywhere you get your podcast, Facebook or YouTube. Definitely good guys. Lots of good times were had. This will not be quite the 2 hours. As you know, I like to keep it around half an hour, but that is definitely a good episode to listen to. And for the most part, things haven't changed too much, but some things have changed, and I'll go through that as we get through this episode. With that said, again, thank you, everyone, and we'll get right to it. As we begin talking about the Gators schedule, it is one of the most difficult schedules I've ever seen. I do agree with Cole Cubelic, the SEC network analyst, who talked about how much of the emphasis on the schedule and the hardness of the schedule is more about the logos than it is about the teams themselves. That's not to say that the schedule isn't like an 8 or 9, but a lot of people are talking like it's an 11 out of 10 or more than that. I don't think it's quite there. Maybe it lives up to the standard, maybe it doesn't. One thing about it is the 2003 schedule is what I always compare to for the hardest scare schedule, where at the end of the season, 6 of the teams we faced were 10-win teams in the top 15 with a 9-win team being a 7th team we faced. And that was just the regular season. In the postseason, faced Michigan, which was a 7th top 15 team that we played. And among those teams were 2 top 5 teams, including the eventual national champion LSU, who we beat in Death Valley with a true freshman quarterback in Chris Leak. With that said, the Gators will have to buck a few trends to have a good season this year, and I will talk about later what I do think for expectations and what we should see. But to get there, Gators will have to, change a few trends we've seen in the Billy Napier era. The first trend, and by all means, I do not do this to be negative, but more just to inform, away from Gainesville, whether it be neutral site, bowl game, or away games, Billy Napier's 2-10 away from Gainesville and has not beaten a team that finished with a winning record on the road. Something that, if we're going to have a great year, that's going to have to change. Speaking against teams with winning records, currently Billy Napier is 3-12 against teams that finish their season over 500 or at 500. And finally, he's 1-7 against rivals. This year, you start with Miami. You got to turn that around. You've got 5 opportunities to get more wins against rivals. Go and do it. But with that said, I think those trends can be reversed this year, and definitely should be reversed this year. We start off against Miami. Miami, You have Billy Napier. You have Mario Cristobal of Miami, two coaches in year 3 who have had the same recruiting opportunities, have had the same transfer portals, and the same opportunity to develop their players. So really what this comes down to is who has built the better program by year 3 at their respective schools. One thing to factor in is Florida does have the home field advantage. Of course, we all know the Swamp is probably one of the best, if not the best, home field advantage in college football. And I do expect the fans to show up and show out this Saturday. I'm not going to go too deep into any of these games, just give a few thoughts on them to make sure that we hit our time. But also, Miami, a full preview is coming later on this week. Miami is also starting a brand new quarterback in Cam Ward, who I do think some Gators underrate, and then some I think overrate. So we'll see where Ward, comes out. Damian Martinez transfers in, a running back from Oregon State, who had a very good year last year. Now to see if he can do it against SEC as far as Florida goes and ACC play. And again, I do think the Swamp does make a difference. I will give a spoiler alert for the Miami prediction show. I do think Florida does beat Miami in this game. We'll go more into it later on in the week. The second game, we're not going to spend too much time on. It is the Samford Bulldogs. Granted, last time they came into Florida, they put 50 on the board. There were some complicating issues in that, such as the defense really was rebelling to the firing of Todd Grantham and then all sorts of stuff. Got it together in the final few weeks, holding Missouri a little bit lower and leading to a win against Florida State. I don't want to put too much emphasis on an outlier game like that for Samford. This isn't 2021. This isn't the same circumstances. I do think Florida beats Samford handily. A&M comes in week 3, first year under head coach Mike Elko. Mike Elko turned Duke around in year 1 and made them a bit of a threat and was really good in year 2. A great defensive coach. He comes in, takes over a talented A&M team. They face Notre Dame week 1. That's why Florida plays at 3:30, because A&M and Notre Dame took the night slot on ABC. But besides that, Mike Elko, it's his first SEC game coaching. It's on the road. It's in the Swamp. A&M did lose some of their talent. A lot of people think of A&M, they think of that big 2022 record-breaking class, but a lot of that 22 class has transferred out, including 5 stars Evan Stewart, who transferred out, and Walter Nolan, a defensive lineman who transferred out to Ole Miss. So although they have some talent, this is also a group that comes in and shouldn't be in a first year in their first SEC road game, beating a team that is in year 3 of a coach, much less in a year that has been built toward. As we talked about, this defense for Florida, you've got the new coaches, one of your old coaches, some of your old defensive players, and their coordinator came from Florida. So if these indeed were some of the problems at Florida, we should not be having a hard time with their defense, and our offense should be able to at least put some points on the board. And of course, the home field advantage of the Swamp. Again, this is the first SEC game of Mike Elko. I do believe Florida should start 3-0. Then we have Florida's first road game of the season going to Starkville. For those not familiar with the Gators' history in Starkville, it is not very good. Even when we win, we struggle, and we can talk about whether that's 2018, whether that's 2009 with Tim Tebow, or we can go back to 1992 when, we lose on a Thursday night and Florida doesn't play on a weeknight again till, as far as a weeknight in the regular season, doesn't do that again until 2022 when Florida played Florida State on Black Friday. And then Steve Spurrier, I believe it was 98 or 99, punting on 3rd down because of just a poor performance in Mississippi State. Ron Zook, 2004, loses at Mississippi State, is fired the next week. So again, Starkville in the last 30 years has not been a great place for the Gators. The good news, Jeff Lebby, first-year coach. And it's not just, hey, a first-year coach coming in and similar system. No. Will Rogers, the quarterback for the Bulldogs since 2020, 4 years of experience, he's gone. Jeff Lebby comes in. This is the third system for Mississippi State in 3 years. You had Mike Leach back in 2022. Unfortunately, Mike Leach, one of my favorites, passed away. And then last year brought in a coach who wanted to go more towards a pro-style system. And then this year you have Jeff Lebby, who's more of a spread guy and has been successful at UCF, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, and now takes over as an offensive coordinator, now takes over as the head coach of not the Rebels, that's later, of the Bulldogs. And so it's actually their first SEC game of the season. Their biggest test up to that point is an Arizona State team who was 3-9 last year. So we won't know too much about them before going in, but this is a place, 11 a.m. local kickoff, that Florida does need to win. This is one of those things we talked about. You've got to reverse the bad trends, such as 2-10 away from Gainesville. This is a good chance to start that first road game of the season against a team that may or may not end up with a 500 record. Definitely, probably what should be on paper the second easiest game on the schedule, and a good chance to begin the season 4-0. I do believe the Gators get that done. With that said, we're at the first bye, and with that, we're going to talk about my friends at Alvarez Lawn Company. Alvarez Lawn Company, if you're in the Central Florida area and you've got any lawn work you need done, any lawn projects you're looking forward to doing, give my friends at Alvarez Lawn Company a call. You can also text them at 407-490-2617 for a free quote. You can also shoot them an email with what you need done at alvarezlawncompany@gmail.com. Once again, the phone number is 407-490-2617, and the email address is alvarezlawncompany@gmail.com. Alvarez Lawn Company, building plans that work for you. Now we're going to move to the second section of the schedule. Florida's schedule really breaks down 3 parts: the first 4 games, the middle 3 games, and then the final 5 games. In the middle 3 games, we start off October 5th against the UCF Knights. This is a game that is big. I don't think in year 3 you should be losing to a team like UCF. Yes, they have gotten to the Power 4 last year. We're 7-6 in the Big 12. Big 12 is not as hard as the ACC. I think the same thing about Miami being 7-6 last year in the ACC. To me, that's kind of akin to Florida's 5-7. Obviously not quite, because you have winning record and non-winning record, but difficulty-wise, I think it's akin to Florida's 5-7 in the SEC. And so the question is, who can make the biggest jump from last year to this year? They did bring in KJ Jefferson, who last year took Arkansas into the swamp to beat us. However, this isn't the same team. Granted, UCF is not the same team. However, again, you have the aura of the swamp. You've out-recruited UCF for years. There's no reason why you should lose this game at home, or at least as it stands right now. UCF last year, terrible against the run. 122nd against the run. They did have a good pass defense. Granted, I did ask recently my buddy Roger from the Knighted Ones UCF podcast. I said, how much of that good pass defense was because other teams don't need to throw the ball against you? You gave up 200 yards rushing a game. Why would other teams throw the ball? So you're going to decrease air yards against you because teams won't stop running. So we'll see about that. But also, what's the strength of Billy Napier's offenses? The run game. So unless UCF has totally shored up that 122nd ranked rush defense, this is a chance for Florida to let loose Montrell Johnson, Trayon Webb, and the rest of the backs that we talked about in our offensive preview. And again, I think the Gators win this one, start the season off 5-0. Then we move to our 6th game of the season and our second road game. This is October 12th, Neyland Stadium. It'll either be in late afternoon or an 8 o'clock kick. One of the few choice things the choice times left on the Gators schedule. And it will be interesting from what rumors are out there. It might be the checkerboard game. It's been the checkerboard game for Florida in the past. I can tell you, Tennessee fans, they really hate the Gators, and they really hate us for the 2 wins they have in 19 tries. So for them, they're going to be loud. They're going to be raucous. And Florida in the last, 4 trips to Neyland Stadium are 2-2. One of those wins was COVID when you didn't have a full stadium. Definitely was a decent time. I was there, Florida wearing the blue helmets, and of course coming away with the W. But with that said, Tennessee's got a highly, highly touted QB making his first year starting. If you're counting, we got Miami, we've got Mississippi State, we've got UCF, and now for the 4th time facing a QB in their first year starting at their school with Tennessee, and Nico Iamaleava. I think I pronounced that right. If I didn't, oh well, it's a Tennessee Vol, right? Just kidding. Well, if you're a Vol and you're watching that, don't like that, leave a comment. Why not? But yes, Gators 17-2 in the last 19. Neyland will be hot for this. Again, it might be checkerboard, might not. We'll see. I do know that Josh Heupel can call an offense, and if Nico's the real deal, it's going to be a tough task for this Gator team, especially returning receivers Brew McCoy, who, when he's not been injured the past 2 seasons, has been a pretty good receiver, and Squirrel White, who has, and yes, his name is Squirrel. I hope you won't expect much else from a Tennessee Vol. But anyways, who has also been a great receiver for the Vols, and this is a team that will be tough to play. Until I see the trends change of, struggling against teams with winning records, because this Vols team will finish with a winning record, and away from home, I'm going to mark this off with a loss. This is a very winnable game. I will not be shocked if the Gators start 6-0, but until I see those trends change, I'm going to have the Gators at 5-1 after the first 6. And then finally, for this section of the schedule, we have homecoming. The Kentucky Wildcats come to town, and let's count it, 5th team now will face with a brand new QB, as Kentucky is replacing their offensive coordinator, their quarterback, and their running back. And of course, we all know what their running back did to us last year in Lexington. I was there. I will not forget it. But with that said, with all those changes, Florida does have to take advantage. Homecoming does have to take advantage. And you can't, if you're Billy Napier, be 0-3 against Kentucky. This is not 0-3 against Georgia or some top-tier team. This is a team that last year would have had 6 wins if you didn't lose to them. So you got to beat the teams that you have more talent than and that you've out-recruited. And this is the chance to, again, show some trends are changing in a good direction. And I believe the Gators can do that. And if they do, we're looking at 6-1 going into Jacksonville. Personally, I think anything less is a tragedy and pointing in a bad direction, especially when you look at the final section of the schedule, which we will get into in just a second. Before we do, though, I want you to check out our friends at GatorChatter.com. Gator Chatter is a Florida Gator message board where they'll let you talk about anything. Be the biggest super fan pumper you want to be. If you feel like you've got to be negative, they're going to let you be negative. And you know what? Just chat it out and have a good time. And I'll be honest, a lot of these guys are family. If you've never been in a Gator Chatter live chat during a game, I've been there. It's fun seeing the roller coasters of ups and downs. I know some people are like, oh, message boards are for old people. Twitter is nothing but an unorganized message board. At least with message boards, you have a game thread and you have, topics, and people reply to each other rather than a shotgun blast of whatever you see on your feed. With that said, I love Twitter/X, whatever you call it now. And I love GatorChatter.com. Check them out. Gator Chatter, your Florida Gator sports bar. And now let's get into the final section of the Gators season. the first game in this final section is the trip to Jacksonville against the Georgia Bulldogs. Could we pull off the upset? Yes. I've been there and seen us upset teams before, whether that's 2014, whether that's early years of Mark Richt, like 2003, which we referenced earlier, or, several other times. But with that said, until I see that upset, I just can't pick it until I see changes in the direction. That could be, we beat Tennessee or we blast Kentucky, things that make me believe we'll pull it off. But with that said, you've got to be competitive. This is not we show up, get blown out again, and we go home happy. No, you've got to make this a 4-quarter game. And also, if you're making a 4-quarter game with your third year of talent and everything that we've discussed in the offense and defensive preview, if you're making a 4-quarter game, you never know when the pressure on the major, I believe it's several scores favorites right now, when the pressure can just break on them and something falls your way. By making a 4-score game, you have that chance to pull the upset. If it's not a 4-score game, A, you don't have the chance, and B, doesn't really say much about progress. And I want to see that progress. And part of that, I've said elsewhere, is to not be blown out in any game. And that includes the trip to Jacksonville. And it's not like it's a away game. You got half your fans there, half Georgia fans. At least give your fans some hope. And speaking of that, the next week, you've got to take a trip to Austin, Texas. First time the Gators have played the Longhorns in Austin. And I do believe it's the first matchup overall, which is shocking. Could be wrong about that. I'm sure someone will post in the comments. If not, please comment down below. With that said, Texas essentially has 3 weeks to prepare for the Gators. What do I mean by that? Well, 2 weeks before they play Florida, they've got Vanderbilt. They out-talent Vanderbilt so much that they can probably start some install for Florida while just having a little bit of focus on Vanderbilt, come away with the win. The next week, Texas has a bye. So week 2, you can start working and really start focusing on Florida. And then there's Florida week, the week after. Meanwhile, we're coming off of a game against the Bulldogs. Win or lose, that will be a tough physical game. And we're coming into a well-rested Texas team that has had time to prepare for us. It's an 11 a.m. local kick, which is something that we have struggled with. I mentioned that with Mississippi State. You go into Texas, again, until I see these trends change. I do think with a team that made the playoffs last year, Florida is probably going to lose this game. Doesn't mean it's not possible. Again, you got to keep it close, like I said with Georgia. And if you keep it close, you never know what could happen. You could have someone fumble a snap. You could have any sort of things, tip ball, interception, pick six. You could just run away with it. And that's what we're going to see with this. Currently, Texas is on its third string running back. First 2 running backs are out for the season with various injuries. So you never know what could happen there. Steve Sarkisian has built a powerhouse, though. So I'm not sure if Florida this year gets it done. However, next year in the Swamp, I do think it's a great chance for Florida to take it to Texas. So at this point, I do see the Gators being 6-3. This next game, I do think, is a big game for Billy Napier. I mean, they're all big games, especially Miami, but this one as well, LSU. Year 3, Brian Kelly. They lost a ton of talent. They're in a transition year. They lost 2 first-round receivers and a first-round quarterback. That's pretty insane. You've gone toe-to-toe with them the past 2 years. Now they've lost that major offensive talent. Their defense has been statistically worse than you last year. So can you, if you both make equal jumps, your defense should be better than theirs. And if you're really developing on defense, you may be able to jump even further, making the gap bigger between your defenses. Meanwhile, your offense, with the changes, Garrett Nussmeier may be a pretty good quarterback. He's not Jaden Daniels. This is a game that's going to be in the Swamp. Another option kickoff between 3:30 and 8 o'clock. So this could be at night game. Could still be a very good 3:30 game. Florida fans do get loud at 3:30. With that said, you really got to beat your rivals. This is at home. LSU plays Alabama the week before, so where we have some bad luck with who we play the week before, how Texas has 3 weeks to prepare for us. You've got, granted, we're going to have 2 physical weeks ahead of time, but this is not an LSU that's been able to sit back. This is an LSU that had Bama at home the week before. And in a transition year, you've got to break the losing streak to LSU. Haven't beat LSU since 2018. Now is as good of time as any, as this will be the weakest LSU team you will face for years. I do believe we get that done. The more I think about it, again, with all predictions, things could change. LSU could get a big injury, or Florida, let's hope not, but Florida could have something weird happen. You never know. So these are based on what I'm seeing right now, recording in August. Then we move to week 11, but at that point, I do see Florida as 7-3. Ole Miss coming off of a bye. They do have Georgia the week we played Texas. They do have Georgia, and then LSU week. They have a bye, and then they come to the Swamp. So they do have a physical game, but they get to rest up, have 2 weeks before coming to the Swamp. This is an Ole Miss team that may be playing for a playoff berth. Last year, won 11 games. Their only 2 losses were to the 2 teams that were in the SEC title game, and that's Georgia, Alabama. Alabama, they led at the half, just really didn't do much in the second half. Oh, and did I mention both those games were on the road? The Georgia game, they didn't play close, which is not good for them, but then they beat Penn State in the bowl, get 11 wins for the first time in program history. And how did they celebrate? They went and got the number 1 transfer portal class, according to 24/7. They've brought in a lot of talent, essentially trying to Hail Mary for the year and leverage this moment in time as a Ole Miss shot at a national title. I don't know if they do it, but I do think that barring some unforeseen circumstances, they're going to come into, the Swamp with something to play for. Whether it's Georgia just embarrassed them for a second year in a row, except for this time it was in Oxford, or they've beaten Georgia and now they see some light at the end of the tunnel. So they could have revenge on their mind, could be seeing light at the end of the tunnel. I do think that they're not eliminated from playoff contention. Again, things could change, and I could be wrong about that. But if they're not eliminated from playoff contention by the time they come to Gainesville, I expect them to be a very, very focused team. As of right now, I think it's a winnable game. I do think that many Florida fans see the name Ole Miss, and just like I said, there are games like, for example, Texas A&M, who, by the way, only has 3 games of 500, or 3 years, or maybe 4 of 500 or above in the SEC since joining 2012. Really have not been great in the SEC, but I think logos like A&M or LSU may be overrated in some people's minds this year, where I do think Ole Miss is an underrated logo this year coming into the Swamp by many. I do think it's a tough game as of right now, and again, this could change. As of right now, I do think Ole Miss does come out of Gainesville with the win. Hopefully not, but that still gives Florida a 6-1 home record for the year, which 6 wins at home is still very, very good, and more wins than we had all of last year, home and away and neutral combined. And then we finish up against Florida State. Florida State, of course, week 0 loses to Georgia Tech. I don't know how to feel about that because Georgia Tech has, in their time under Brent Key, beaten 5 ranked teams. So I don't know if this is an LOL Florida State lost to a bad team or if this is an LOL Florida State lost to a good team. Either way, LOL Florida State lost. But with that said, I don't know where we judge Florida State based on this Georgia Tech team and also it being week 0 yet. But with that said, one thing that I had been saying that I think is important is that this FSU team is in a transitional year. No one really thought DJU was going to be a solution or a great replacement at quarterback, and he showed that this past week and showed why air yards can matter. And air yards, of course, we talked on the offense, which is yards past the line of scrimmage. Didn't do too much beyond the line of scrimmage, and the FSU offense suffered because of it. Also, we're 0-2 under Billy Napier against the Seminoles. However, both games have been close. And so this is a year where they're transitioning. Even though we're in Doak Campbell Stadium, you've got to come out and get the win. And you've got to beat rivals. I do think this year you've got to come away with a winning record against rivals. All your rivalry games, with maybe the exception of Georgia, are winnable. I do think you can beat Tennessee on the road, although I have not predicted it yet. Again, things can happen. I do think it's winnable. I do think it's a close game, but I do think you will and should beat Miami. I do think you will and should beat LSU, and I definitely think you should be able to go on the road and beat FSU. Beating FSU, we talked at the beginning about the 2-10 away from Gainesville. That shows a change. That gives hope. We talked about the 3-12 against teams finishing with a winning record. FSU will probably finish with a winning record. That shows a change in that. And we talked about the 1-7 against rivals. That shows a change for the better in that. So the FSU game is a way to get a just full sweep of changing some negatives into positives and showing that growth for the future we want to see. I have predicted several places, including Respect Our Decision, that we finish 7-5. Going through this, I really think it should be 8-4 based on, how the other teams are, who's at home, who's away, who's in a transitional year, as I've gone through and described. Although I could see 7-5 because Florida, and this has been said for years, not just under Billy Napier, it's been said, even going back to some previous good coaches, Florida somehow finds a way many years to lose a game they shouldn't. Whether we're talking about Ole Miss in 2008, for an example of one, during a national title year, or, we're talking about losing to a Georgia Southern 2013, not that I want to remind that, or, missing a field goal and then not doing well in overtime against Arkansas last year. Sometimes UF finds a way to lose a game they shouldn't. And I'd love for that to be not the case this year, but that's where I could see 7-5 happening after rethinking everything, going through, re-looking at everything since I've predicted 7-5. But I will up that to 8-4. I do think that the bottom line now, I don't have any control over this, but I do think the bottom line is you've got to go 7-5. Why 7-5? Among or forgetting everything else, you've got to guarantee a winning record in the regular season. I'm not for saying another losing record is cool, even if it's a fluky bowl game that makes us 6-7. A coach's job is to come to Florida and win. Every program to win a national title in the 12-game era of college football with 12 regular season games has won 10 games by year 3. Many of us have said, we'll take 7-5 as a baseline for year 3 here, as long as there's a major jump in year 4. If we're willing to, forget what the metrics say you need to do by year 3, definitely got to get a winning record. And to do that, don't let there be a chance of some fluky bowl game get to 7-5. I do think the Gators can get to 8-4, but that is my rant on the record. I do get a question about it a lot, actually. But with that said, it's definitely a good time to, look forward to a season. Florida football season is fun. We only get 12 guaranteed games of these a year. Hopefully we get 13, 14, and then sometime in the future, hopefully the near future, we get, 13 plus 3, 16 total games, and get to that national title game again. With that said, for this year, let's just show that progress in both win and reversing those trends that I talked about earlier. And with that, we can be happy looking towards the future and definitely expecting big things in 2025. And so, I'm happy that the season's almost here. Can't wait to do the Miami preview. Can't wait to be in the swamp on Saturday. If you agree with me, disagree, if you have questions, I do answer any comments down in the comment section. Leave a comment. Be sure to like, be sure to share with friends, and subscribe if you have not. I said the goal was to be 200 subscribers by the time the season kicked off. I would love to see 250 just because we've surpassed the 200 goal. So what's the next goal? 250 subscribers. But that's all because of you. And again, thank you for making the past few episodes the biggest ever for this podcast. With that said, thank you everybody for listening. And as always, go Gators.